1980, four village nuns from Northern California vanished without a trace, leaving their small, tight-knit community filled with sorrow and disturbing speculation. For nearly 3 decades, no one knew what became of them. But on the 28th anniversary of their disappearance, Father Elias Moreau, the town's priest and the brother of the youngest missing nun, made a chilling discovery that would finally unveil the horrifying truth. That morning, sunlight streamed through the stained glass of St. Agnes of Mercy Catholic Church, painting the wooden pews in a cascade of colors. Father Elias stood solemnly at the altar, finishing the memorial prayer. May the souls of the departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace, he said, making the sign of the cross. Amen, echoed the congregation. The church was filled with familiar faces, some elderly, others middle-aged or young, all united by the unresolved grief of losing sisters Mildred, Joan, Beatrice, and Therese. Help me with a like and a subscribe to motivate me to make better videos, and don't forget to comment which country you are from. For Father Elias, the pain was personal. Sister Therese had been his younger sister, and her disappearance had shaken his faith deeply. After the service, Father Elias greeted parishioners one by one. An elderly woman named Mrs. Harmon, with tears in her eyes, recalled Sister Mildred teaching her children. Once the last person left the church grew quiet, Father Elias returned to his modest office at the rear of the building and, away from the public eye, finally let his composure slip. Alone, he wept, his grief still raw after 28 years. After collecting himself, he opened a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box containing old photographs. The one he lingered on showed Therese on the day she took her final vows, so young, radiant, and full of purpose. He whispered, "I was so proud of you. I still am." But the haunting question returned. Had he led her to her fate by encouraging her vocation? With a stern prayer, he pushed the thought away and examined another photo, the last known image of the four nuns. They were sitting on a bench outside the small, secluded St. Denis Chapel near the edge of Shasta Trinity National Forest, just days before they vanished. The visit was meant to be a peaceful 2-day retreat before a religious feast and a diocesan task to evaluate the old chapel's condition. Sister Therese had been asked to document it. Staring at the photograph, Father Elias calculated their current ages. Mildred and Joan would be in their 90s, if alive, but Beatrice and Therese would still be in their 50s, possibly alive somewhere. He remembered the frantic searches, police combing the forest mountains and towns, finding nothing. Eventually, the authorities blamed a bear attack, citing the area's wildlife. But with no evidence, no clothing, no signs of struggle, Father Elias had always doubted that theory. Rumors emerged over the years claiming the nuns ran away to start new lives. He had fought to silence them, knowing in his heart that Therese would never abandon her faith or family. As his eyes wandered to the background of the photo, he saw the chapel, modest with white walls and a bell tower surrounded by dense forest. Something stirred inside him. He hadn't visited St. Nuns in over 20 years, too haunted by memories. But now, on this somber day, he felt an irresistible pull. Maybe it was sentimentality or something deeper, perhaps a final whisper from God. Could there still be something left to uncover? Without hesitation, Father Elias tucked the photo of the 4 nuns into his pocket, picked up his Bible and rosary, and walked out determined to follow the forgotten trail one last time. Father Elias left his office, with purpose walking briskly through the church parking lot. He slid behind the wheel of his modest sedan, placed the old photograph of the 4 nuns on the passenger seat, and offered a quick prayer for guidance. Then he started the engine and pulled away from St. Agnes, heading toward the forest and the ghosts that had haunted him for 28 years. The drive from Eldon Hollow to the Shasta Trinity National Forest took about 90 minutes, winding through familiar territory. Neat homes and storefronts gave way to open farmland, which slowly blurred into thick wilderness. Towering pines and cedars crowded the roadside, their shadows flickering across the pavement as the car climbed into the hills. With every mile, Father Elias's thoughts drifted back to the many times he had made this same journey in the days after the disappearance. Back then, his car had been filled with flyers bearing Teresa's face, his heart filled with urgent hope. Now he carried only memories and a quiet acceptance of the mystery that had shaped his life. As the road narrowed and climbed into the foothills, Father Elias slowed down, scanning the trees for the old dirt turnoff that once led to St. Dina's chapel. But instead of the familiar path, he found a paved private road sealed with a large ornate gate. A bold "No Trespassing" sign warned him off, flanked by smaller notices declaring it private property. Confused, he pulled to the roadside and studied the landscape, comparing it to the background in the photo. The distant mountains and the unique layout of trees matched exactly. This was the right place. But the chapel was nowhere in sight. He stepped out and approached the gate. Beyond it, the road stretched into the woods, flanked by ornamental trees and shrubs, with no sign of the humble white chapel that once stood here. Unsettled, Father Elias pulled out his phone and dialed Harold Gibbons, the old caretaker of St. Dina's chapel. They hadn't spoken in years, but he hoped Harold could shed some light on the changes. After several rings, a familiar gruff voice answered. "Hello," Elias introduced himself. "Harold, this is Father Elias Marrow from St. Agnes." A brief pause, then recognition. "Father Elias, it's been a long time. How are you?" "I'm well," Elias answered, though it wasn't quite true. "Harold, I'm standing where I believe the chapel used to be, but it's gone." Another pause, longer this time. That's right, Father. The diocese decommissioned it years ago, sold it in '82 to a man named Silas Redwood. He had it demolished. A chill crept through Father Elias, despite the afternoon sun. I never heard anything about the sale or the demolition. Well, after what happened with the nuns, attendance dropped off. Then the bell tower cracked and almost hit a man. Remember Thomas Frell? After that, the bishop said it wasn't worth the cost to maintain. Elias stared at the gate in disbelief. And Mr. Redwood, does he still own it? Oh yes, Harold said. Big property now. The old chapel site's part of his estate. His house is farther back, near the thick forest. Elias hesitated. I had hoped to visit the chapel today. It's the anniversary. I'm sorry, Father. I know this day means a lot to you, Harold said, his tone softening. But Redwood's not exactly welcoming. Bit of a recluse, keeps to himself, avoids the locals. Elias sighed. Thank you, Harold. I appreciate the information. Then Harold added, I live nearby, not 15 minutes from where you are. I saved some things from the chapel, old prayer books, the altar cross. If you'd like to come see them, you're welcome. That's very kind of you, Elias replied. I might take you up on that. But first, I think I'd like to try speaking with Mr. Redwood. Do you know how to get to his main house? After a short hesitation, Harold gave him directions to a public road that looped around and brought him closer to the estate, since the front gate was always locked. 20 minutes later, Father Elias was driving down a narrow, winding lane that ran along the edge of Redwood's property. Through breaks in the trees, he glimpsed manicured lawns and eventually spotted a large, elegant home that looked more like a mountain lodge than a rural house. It stood 3 stories tall, built of natural stone and timber, with wide windows and terraces overlooking the forest. The wealth behind it stood in stark contrast to the humble town of Eldon Hollow. Elias pulled into a small parking area near a service entrance, straightened his collar, and stepped out. As he walked toward the main entrance, he passed carefully tended gardens and a koi pond, the air filled with the scent of pine and flowers. The estate's beauty was undeniable, but something in the atmosphere felt wrong, too quiet, too controlled. Still, he climbed the steps to the heavy oak door and knocked firmly, ready to confront whatever lay within. The door swung open almost instantly, revealing a tall, athletic man in his 60s, dressed in upscale exercise gear. His neatly trimmed silver hair and firm grip on a leather dog leash added to his imposing presence. The man's neutral expression shifted quickly to one of irritation as he spotted Father Elias's clerical collar. Yes, he asked, the impatience in his voice unmistakable. Good afternoon, Father Elias said with a gentle smile. Are you Mr. Silas Redwood? I am Redwood, replied his jaw tightening. And you're trespassing on private property. I apologize for coming unannounced. My name is Father Elias Maru. from St. Agnes of Mercy Church in Eldon Hollow. He extended a hand in greeting, but Redwood didn't take it. "What do you want?" He snapped, his fingers tightening on the leash. Remaining composed, Father Elias lowered his hand. "I was hoping for just a few minutes of your time. I visited the location where St. Dana's chapel once stood, and I was surprised to find it gone. If you saw it's not there," Redwood snapped, "why come knocking on my door?" "I spoke with Harold Gibbons," Elias continued, "the former caretaker. He said you purchased the property. I simply wanted to... To what, blame me for buying land that was up for sale?" Redwood stepped closer, his tone darkening. Elias instinctively took a step back. "You one of those who thinks the ground's sacred or something? The diocese didn't think so. They sold it." No, Elias said quickly, raising his hands in peace. "I don't blame you at all. I just wasn't aware it had been demolished. The chapel had personal significance for me." Redwood seemed to cool slightly, but remained icy. "Well, now you know. It's gone. And good riddance. I sleep better without that blasted bell ringing every day, giving me migraines." "The Angelus bell is a beautiful tradition," Elias said gently. "It's a call to prayer, a reminder of hope and salvation." "Spare me the sermon," Redwood sneered. "If people need reminders to pray, they can set an alarm. No need to disturb the whole forest with medieval noise pollution." Realizing the conversation was deteriorating, Father Elias tried another approach. "I understand you value your privacy, and I apologize for the intrusion. Perhaps we could speak another day." "There won't be another day," Redwood said flatly. "I don't care to discuss a demolished building with a priest I've never met. Leave now, or I'll call the sheriff." Elias gave a respectful nod. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Redwood. Peace be with you." Without a word, Redwood closed the door firmly in his face. Father Elias turned and walked back to his car, disappointed and disturbed. There was something deeper in Redwood's demeanor, more than rudeness, almost a simmering hostility toward the church. As Elias reached his car, he glanced up at the house. Was it his imagination, or was Redwood watching from an upstairs window? A chill ran down his spine. He slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, torn between heading back to Eldon Hollow or accepting Harold's invitation to view some salvaged items from the chapel. Perhaps seeing those pieces would bring the closure he'd hoped for. Yet, as he drove, he found himself steering toward the place where the chapel had once stood. He didn't know why there was nothing left to see, but something in his heart pulled him that way. Rounding a bend, he glimpsed the former chapel site through a break in the trees. Where the building once stood was now a landscaped clearing. Suddenly, the radio, supposedly off, crackled to life, filling the car with a haunting sound. Gregorian chant, the sacred music of monks echoing with eerie clarity. Elias's hands gripped the wheel as the chant continued for several seconds, then abruptly fell silent. "What on earth?" he whispered, staring at the radio. He turned it on, then off again. Nothing. Had he imagined it? Was it exhaustion, stress? But the moment felt familiar. He had experienced sensations like this before tingling skin, a warmth in his ears, moments his spiritual director once described as signs of divine movement. Then, as if confirming his doubts, the chanting returned briefly. This time, Elias was sure it wasn't his imagination. Something was guiding him. Without fully knowing why, he executed a careful U-turn and returned to the gated road that marked the entrance to Redwood's estate. He parked on the shoulder and stared at the metal gate, its no trespassing signs standing like sentinels. His hands remained on the steering wheel as he sat there questioning his next move, knowing full well that whatever was happening wasn't ordinary. But something told him deep in his spirit that this was where he needed to be. Now. Contemplating his next move, Father Elias closed his eyes and whispered, "Lord, guide my actions. If I am about to err in judgment, show me the right path." Yet, the strange sense of spiritual prompting persisted, filling him with a quiet urgency he couldn't ignore. After a final moment of hesitation, he stepped out of the car and approached the gate, fully aware that what he was considering, trespassing, stood in direct conflict with his role as a priest. Still, the unexplainable chanting from his radio had awakened something deeper than protocol, a conviction that defied logic. Rather than force his way through the gate, he began walking along the perimeter fence, searching for a vantage point to observe the former chapel site. The wrought iron fence was tall, 8 feet at least, and sturdy, though the land it ran through was uneven, dipping and rising with the forest floor. As he moved, Father Elias mentally reconstructed the old layout of Centennies. If memory served, the wooden bench from the photograph had been to the chapel's east, near a large oak tree. That tree was now gone, likely removed during landscaping, but a familiar cluster of pines still stood where they had decades before. Using that as a landmark, Elias continued. Suddenly, his foot caught on a raised tree root, sending him stumbling forward. He instinctively reached out, his hands grabbing the iron fence. His momentum pressed hard against one section where the posts were poorly anchored. With a crack, the weakened portion buckled, creating a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Elias found himself partially on Redwood's property, the broken fence beneath him. "Oh dear Lord," he muttered, brushing himself off and glancing around. He hadn't meant to cause damage, let alone trespass, but now faced with this unexpected opening, he hesitated. Was it providence or temptation? Seeing no one nearby, Elias crossed himself and stepped through the gap. Moving carefully, but with purpose, he advanced toward the area where the chapel had once stood. The landscape was manicured now, with decorative shrubs and imported flora that clashed with the surrounding forest. No sign remained of the sanctuary that once stood here. No foundation, no statue, no memorial. It was as if The chapel had been deliberately erased from history. Then something caught his eye, a faint glint of metal near the base of a shrub. Curious, he approached and parted the foliage, revealing a rusted metal grate embedded in the ground. It was old, with ornate scrollwork along the edge, and clearly didn't match the modern aesthetic of the rest of Redwood's estate. Elias crouched to examine it. It looked like an air vent, possibly from the 1930s or 40s. But why would it still be here if the chapel had been demolished? And why would a landscaped garden need ventilation? Leaning in, he listened and froze. A sound drifted up from the grate, a faint melodic hum, unmistakably human. Then a soft cough. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. The sound was eerily similar to the Gregorian chant he had heard in the car. But this was no malfunction. Someone was below. "Hello?" He called gently, but the humming continued unaffected. Standing quickly, Father Elias scanned the area, half expecting Silas Redwood to appear. But the woods remained silent, the main house hidden by trees, and no surveillance cameras were in sight. Pulling out his phone, with trembling fingers, Elias dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" came the calm voice on the other end. "My name is Father Elias Morrow," he said quietly. "I'm on the property of Silas Redwood, near the former site of St. Dana's Chapel off Route 37. He hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I believe someone may be trapped underground. I can hear singing and coughing through a vent." A pause followed. "Sir, are you saying someone might be held against their will?" "I don't know," Elias admitted. "But there's definitely someone down there. This is private property, and I'm concerned." "Are you on the property legally?" the dispatcher asked, her tone skeptical. Elias winced. "No, I accidentally damaged a section of fence and found myself inside. I realize I'm trespassing, but this seemed like an emergency." "Understood. What's your exact location on the property?" He gave the clearest description he could, explaining his proximity to the old chapel site. "We'll dispatch officers to investigate," the dispatcher assured him. "Please return to your vehicle and wait there unless you feel unsafe." "Thank you," Elias said, exhaling in relief. "I'll wait by the roadside." After hanging up, he cast one last look at the grate. The humming had stopped, replaced by faint shuffling sounds. Someone was definitely down there. Chilled by the implication, Elias retraced his steps, carefully slipping back through the broken fence and returning to his car. As he approached, he pulled out his phone again and called Harold Gibbons. "Harold, it's Father Elias again. I need to ask something. When St. Dana's was still standing, was there ever a basement? An underground room?" Harold sounded surprised. "No, Father. That chapel was built on a flat slab. No basement, no crypt, nothing like that." "Why do you ask?" Father Elias quickly explained everything he had discovered. The old air vent hidden beneath decorative shrubbery. The unmistakable sounds of chanting and coughing coming from below ground. Harold Gibbons was stunned. "That's impossible," he said firmly. "There was never any underground structure at St. Dana's. I maintained that property for 20 years. I would know. Then the only explanation, Father Elias said slowly, is that something was built after the chapel was demolished, after Mr. Redwood took ownership. Harold's face darkened. That's disturbing. I've already called the police, Elias added. They're on their way. Then I'm coming too, Harold decided. I know that land better than anyone. I can be there in 10 minutes. After ending the call, Father Elias remained in his car, fingering the beads of his rosary and murmuring prayers for whoever might be trapped beneath the earth where St. Dina's once stood. The prayers gave him calm but not clarity. Who could possibly be below ground? What would anyone be doing in a hidden chamber on such remote land? And was it even remotely possible, however irrational, that it had something to do with the 4 nuns who disappeared 28 years ago? That last thought seemed implausible. Yet the timing, the setting, the haunting him, it was all too aligned to be dismissed outright. His thoughts were interrupted by the crunch of gravel under tires. A battered pickup truck pulled up behind him. It was Harold. He stepped out of the cab, concern carved into every line of his face. Any sign of the police yet? He asked. Not yet, Elias replied, getting out of the car. Thank you for coming so quickly. Harold's eyes swept over the fence and the estate beyond. Been thinking about what you told me, he said grimly. It makes no sense. If Redwood built something underground, someone would have noticed. You can't dig a chamber without heavy machinery, unless Father Elias offered it was done gradually. Or maybe there was already a natural cavern beneath the property that he modified. Harold shook his head. No caves here. Mostly bedrock after a few feet of soil. Before they could say more, the sound of sirens broke through the forest. A sheriff's cruiser rounded the bend and pulled in front of them, its lights flashing siren off. 2 deputies stepped out. The older one had graying hair at his temples and a seasoned presence. The younger, lean and alert, moved with military precision. Their name badges read Deputy Williams and Deputy Reynolds. Father Moreau, the older officer, asked, approaching. Yes, thank you for coming, Elias said. This is Harold Gibbons, former caretaker of St. Dina's Chapel. Williams nodded. Dispatch said you reported sounds from underground. Can you walk us through it? Elias described everything from his unplanned entry to the discovery of the vent, emphasizing that the trespassing had been unintentional. Williams waved off the concern. Let's focus on the potential welfare issue. If someone's trapped, that's what matters right now. Harold spoke up. I worked that property for 2 decades. There was never an underground structure there. Whatever it is, it wasn't part of the chapel. Reynolds looked up from his notes. Redwood's a known figure around here. This could have serious implications. I'm not accusing him, Elias said. I'm just concerned about whoever might be down there. Williams nodded. Fair enough. Let's take a look. He turned to Harold. Mind coming with us? Of course not. The 4 men moved toward the broken section of the fence. Father Elias led them to the vent. The deputies crouched to examine it. Williams observed the old scrollwork. This doesn't fit the rest of the property. Reynolds shined a flashlight through the grate. Can't see much. The shaft angles off. Listen, Elias urged. The group fell silent. After several long moments of quiet, A voice emerged, soft melodic humming, unmistakably a sacred tune. "Salve Regina," Williams whispered. Harold nodded. "That's right. The Marian antiphon, sung in convents for centuries." Then came the coughing again, rasping, labored. Reynolds stood concerned, hardening his features. "Someone's definitely down there. And it sounds like they're not well." Williams's demeanor shifted. "We need to speak with Mr. Redwood. This is a welfare check now." Harold shook his head. "That vent wasn't there before. I'd stake my life on it. I don't understand how, That's what we're going to find out," Williams said. They returned to the road and drove the short distance to the main house. The lodge loomed in the clearing, silent and imposing. Williams instructed Elias and Harold to stay by their vehicles. The deputies approached the front door and knocked. After a long pause, they realized someone was approaching from the rear. Silas Redwood appeared, still in his exercise gear, a large German shepherd on a leash. His face twisted into a snarl when he saw Elias and Harold. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, storming toward the officers. "Why are these trespassers back on my property?" Deputy Williams raised a hand. "Mr. Redwood, I'm Deputy Williams with the Shasta County Sheriff's Department. We're conducting a welfare check. We received a report of potential distress coming from beneath your property. We'd like to ask you a few questions." "Father, this is Deputy Williams," came the voice on the other end of the line, firm, but carrying a subtle note of urgency. Father Elias immediately sat up straighter in Harold's armchair, cradling the phone tightly. "Yes, Deputy, I'm here," Elias said, signaling to Harold with a raised hand. Harold paused mid-sentence, watching intently. "We've just received preliminary records from county archives and dispatch," Williams continued. "And there are some developments you should know about." Father Elias felt a knot form in his stomach. "Go on." "First," the deputy said, "we confirmed the deed transfer of the chapel site in early 1982, as expected. The sale to Mr. Silas Redwood was legal, but what's interesting is that the survey, filed during the property reassessment, contains a handwritten amendment unusual for official documentation. It describes an existing subgrade structure near the chapel site." Elias's breath caught. An existing structure. But Harold maintained that chapel for decades. "He told me there was no such thing." "I know," Williams said. "That's the second thing. We contacted the diocese office in Sacramento to inquire about architectural plans or permits. They sent over some files, and from what we can tell, there were no blueprints submitted after the original construction in the 1920s. That suggests the chapel had no basement, no crypt, nothing formal. But..." His voice dropped slightly. "We found a line in a 1935 maintenance report, barely legible, that mentions an unsealed storage space beneath the nave, possibly used for dry goods. No further mention appears in any later document." "A crawl space," Elias murmured, thinking aloud. "Or a root cellar, maybe. Forgotten by everyone, except someone who knew it existed." "Possibly," Williams agreed. "But that's not all. We also ran a basic background check on Redwood and flagged something odd. His official records begin in 1981, just before the chapel purchase. Before that, there's nothing, not even a driver's license or employment history. That's extremely rare for someone with as much wealth and property as he holds today. Elias swallowed hard. You think that identity might be falsified? I'm not saying that yet, but something's off. And then there's this: Redwood has had 0 utility requests for the back acreage. That means no plumbing, no wiring, no septic on paper. But earlier today, we reviewed satellite thermal scans taken last winter during a routine forestry inspection and noticed a localized heat signature beneath the exact area you described, despite snow covering the ground. Heat, Elias repeated, like from a person living underground or machinery running underground, Williams said. Either way, we now have cause to request a warrant. I'm heading back to the judge's chambers in Reading to file the paperwork. With luck, we'll be executing a search warrant by morning. Thank you, Deputy Elias said quietly, his mind spinning. Please keep me informed. I will, Williams assured him. But Father, one more thing. If there really is someone down there, we'll need medical personnel on standby. I'll alert the paramedics just in case. Understood. When the call ended, Father Elias relayed the details to Harold, who listened with growing disbelief and a tight jaw. I always thought Redwood was odd, Harold muttered. But this feels like something out of a nightmare. Father Elias glanced toward the window, where the dark silhouette of the forest pressed against the fading daylight. Somewhere out there, beneath the manicured earth of Redwood's estate, was a voice. A voice singing ancient hymns. A voice that hadn't been heard in nearly 30 years. And he knew, with every fiber of his being, someone was waiting to be found. The voice on the phone had been calm, but charged with energy. Deputy Williams had secured the emergency warrant. Now, Father Elias and Harold sat quietly in Harold's truck, parked along the public road near Redwood's estate. From their vantage point, they could see police cruisers, a forensic van, and even an ambulance quietly assembling in the distance. The presence of paramedics sent a cold shiver down Father Elias's spine. It implied that the officers were preparing for the worst. Deputy Williams approached their vehicle, only briefly, showing Elias how to access the live stream from his body camera. You'll be able to watch from here, he instructed. But do not approach under any circumstances. Understood. Both men nodded. On the phone screen, the body camera view showed the officers presenting the warrant at Redwood's front door. His reaction was explosive visible fury, audible threats, and angry protestations. But none of it mattered now. The search had been authorized, and the officers methodically began their work clearing the main house and its basement. After nearly 45 minutes, Williams updated the stream. We're heading toward the forest road, he narrated, checking a structure Mr. Redwood identifies as a storage shed. The camera followed the group through the woods, along a narrow path that twisted beneath thick tree cover. The light was fading fast, casting long, eerie shadows through the forest. Eventually, the shed came into view, a squat, weather-worn building that looked perfectly ordinary. Redwood's voice could be heard in the background. "It's just a tool shed. Garden supplies. You're wasting time." The interior of the shed matched his description. It was dusty, cluttered with lawn equipment and tools. But then a sudden noise. A heavy wrench dropped by one of the officers hit the floor with a hollow thunk. Deputy Reynolds knelt, tapping the boards. "This section sounds different," he said, flashing his light across the surface. "The wood's newer here." Despite Redwood's protests, they began pulling up the floorboards. Beneath them was a stone staircase. "Mr. Redwood," Deputy Williams called. "Would you care to explain this?" Redwood said nothing. His earlier arrogance drained away, replaced by stony silence. When asked for a key to the locked wooden door at the bottom, he claimed ignorance. "That was here when I bought the place." But the officers were undeterred. One of them located a hidden niche in the stone wall where an old iron key lay concealed. With a metallic groan, the door creaked open, revealing a narrow, man-made tunnel. "We're entering a subterranean passage," Williams narrated. "Stone walls, wooden beams. Recent construction disguised as old." They moved cautiously, their tactical lights sweeping through the darkness. After several hundred feet, the tunnel curved and opened into a crude chamber. What the camera revealed caused Father Elias's breath to catch in his throat. A thin mattress, a bucket, a table, scraps of food, religious carvings, crosses, saints, scriptural scenes etched into the stone walls. Every surface bore signs of a quiet monastic existence, and then a frail voice barely audible. "Help! Is someone there?" The flashlight shifted, illuminating a gaunt elderly woman lying on the mattress. Her grey hair was cropped short. She clutched a wooden rosary carved by hand. Deputy Williams stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Williams, Shasta County Sheriff's Department. We're here to help. Can you tell me your name?" Her lips cracked, her voice rasped. "Sister Teres Maro." In Harold-struck, Father Elias gasped. His hand covered his mouth, tears streaming down his face. "My sister," he whispered. "It's my sister." Harold placed a steadying hand on his arm, his own eyes wide with stunned disbelief. Back on the camera, the officers carefully approached Sister Therese. She looked emaciated, but alert, her eyes flicking between them with a quiet intensity. Around her were relics of unwavering devotion, crosses carved from stone, a worn Bible, and on one wall, a massive crucifix etched into the stone with painstaking care. Deputy Williams knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "We're going to get you medical attention right away." And as paramedics were called down the tunnel, lit with artificial light and urgent footsteps, Father Elias knew, through all the mystery and years of loss, he had found what he'd been searching for. Not only the truth, but a miracle. Was apparently a strict and emotionally distant woman. According to Redwood's writings, she constantly spoke of sin, repentance, and punishment, instilling in him a warped understanding of faith and femininity. Deputy Williams's voice was calm, but beneath the surface ran a current of restrained horror. From what we can tell, Father, he came to equate nuns with abandonment, rejection, and personal shame. His mother's choice to take vows rather than return for him appears to have created a lifelong obsession, one that festered into something monstrous. Father Elias pressed his hand over his eyes, a deep ache settling in his chest. So he took that pain and twisted it into vengeance, and targeted innocent women who had done nothing but serve God. "I'm afraid so," Williams confirmed. The journal documents his surveillance of St. Denis and the sisters. He refers to them by name. He writes about watching them, hearing them pray, and eventually planning what he called a cleansing act. A cleansing, Elias repeated, horrified. He saw it as a way to purge the source of his own suffering. His notes suggest that he lured them, perhaps under false pretenses, to the underground chamber. It wasn't just confinement, Father. It was ritualistic, almost a perverse form of religious retribution. He believed they had to atone for what he saw as personal betrayals. Williams paused. "We've also found signs that Sister Therese was kept isolated for years, only interacting with him occasionally. The nature of his obsession, his control, was deeply psychological. She may have survived physically, but mentally and spiritually, we can only hope she's still intact." Father Elias's voice cracked. "She is. I saw it in her eyes. She said, 'God never left me.' And I believe her." There was silence for a moment. Then Williams said softly, "That's something we all needed to hear today." They exchanged a few final words before ending the call, and Father Elias lowered the phone slowly. Across from him, Harold watched silently, the lines on his face heavy with grief and amazement. He hated the church because he was abandoned by a woman who became a nun, Elias said hollowly. And he used that as justification for everything. Harold shook his head. "It doesn't justify anything. It only shows how broken he was." A nurse appeared at the entrance to the waiting area. Her expression was cautious but kind. "Father Elias." He stood instantly. "She's stable," the nurse said. "Still very weak, and the doctors will need to monitor her closely for the next several days. But she's conscious and asking for you." A tremor passed through him, and he swallowed hard before whispering, "May I see her now?" The nurse nodded. "Just for a few minutes." She led him down a quiet corridor. Every footstep felt like a prayer as he approached the ICU room. The door opened, and for the first time in nearly 3 decades, Father Elias stepped into the same room as his sister. Sister Therese lay in a hospital bed, frail and thin, but unmistakably herself. Her eyes met his, and though her lips were cracked and voice barely audible, she whispered his name, Elias. He approached and took her hand gently in his. "I'm here, Therese. I've been looking for you for 28 years. Her fingers curled around his weakly. "I never stopped praying you would." Tears filled his eyes. "And now, your prayers brought us back together." A faint smile touched her lips, etched with pain, but radiant with faith. God never left me, she repeated, and Father Elias bowed his head, overwhelmed with gratitude. She had been buried in darkness, erased from the world, hidden beneath the ground like a forgotten relic of faith. And yet she had endured. Through silence, fear, and unimaginable suffering, she had held onto the light. And now finally, that light had broken through her feet. We'll bring you to her once she's stabilized and the ICU protocols are in place. Father Elias stood as well, his heart caught between sorrow and gratitude. Thank you, Doctor, for everything. Dr. Chen offered a nod of quiet reassurance before disappearing down the hallway, her clipboard tucked under her arm, leaving Elias and Harold alone once more. For a few long moments, the two men sat in silence, the hum of fluorescent lights above, and the occasional footsteps of hospital staff the only sounds breaking the stillness. Then, as if the floodgates had opened, Father Elias exhaled a deep, trembling breath. The weight of the day, the horrors unveiled, and the miracle that somehow emerged from it all came crashing down upon him. She asked for me, he murmured. After everything, she still believed I'd find her. She never gave up hope, Harold said quietly. That's what kept her alive. Father Elias nodded slowly, wiping at his eyes. She endured hell, and yet she carved crosses into stone. She created light in a place where no light existed. Harold leaned back in his chair, his own expression reflective. I've seen a lot in my life, Father. But this has changed me. It's changed me too, Elias replied. And I suspect it will change our whole town. Just then, his phone buzzed with a message from Deputy Williams Hospital. Security has been informed to restrict press access. We'll have an officer posted at ICU entrance shortly. Let me know if anything urgent arises. Father Elias typed a quick reply of thanks. Then, setting the phone aside, he bowed his head, clutching the small crucifix at his collar. He didn't pray for answers. This time, those would come later in courtrooms and investigations. No, his prayer was one of peace. For Sister Therese, for Sister Beatrice, for Sisters Mildred and Joan, for all the years lost and the healing still to come, for a faith battered but never broken, and for the strength to walk beside his sister as she stepped finally out of darkness and into the light. As Dr. Chen departed, promising to send a nurse when Sister Therese was ready for visitors, Father Elias turned to Harold with quiet resolve. Would you mind if I spent some time in the chapel? He asked. I need to pray. Of course, Harold replied. I'll wait here in case there's any news. Father Elias made his way to the hospital's small interfaith chapel, a quiet, humble space designed to welcome people of all beliefs. Finding it empty, he knelt before the simple altar, bowed his head, and whispered, Thank you, Lord, for this miracle. His voice trembled as tears welled again. Thank you for preserving my sister through her ordeal. Thank you for leading me to her after all these years. He fell into silent prayer, words giving way to raw emotion as he laid bare his soul, joy for his sister's survival, grief for what she had endured, sorrow for those who had not survived, and righteous anger toward the man who had caused so much pain. In the silence of that sacred space, Father Elias wrestled with the same timeless questions that had haunted saints and sinners alike. Why does God allow evil to flourish? Why had Therese suffered while others had forgotten her? And yet, as the stillness stretched and his prayers deepened, peace began to settle over him. Not the peace of full understanding. Some answers he knew would only come in the next life, but the peace of surrender, of trust. What mattered now was not the darkness of the past, but the light of the present. His sister had been found. Her soul, miraculously, had remained intact. Returning to the waiting room, he found Harold speaking quietly with a nurse. She turned toward him and said, "Father Morrow, she's ready for a brief visit." After donning the required protective gown, gloves, and mask, Father Elias followed the nurse through quiet hospital corridors and sliding doors into the ICU. She led him to a private room where machines hummed softly and the rhythmic beep of monitors marked the fragile line between life and death. The figure in the bed looked more shadow than woman gaunt, pale, fragile beyond words. Yet, when her eyes opened and found his, he knew her instantly. The radiance of her spirit, undimmed by time or torment, shone in her gaze. "Elias," she whispered, her voice no louder than breath. "You found me." "Yes," he said, his voice cracking beneath his mask, tears falling freely as he reached for her hand. "I never stopped looking, never stopped praying." A faint smile played at the corners of her cracked lips. "I knew you wouldn't. I told Beatrice God would send you to us someday." "I'm so sorry it took so long," he said, barely able to speak. She shook her head, the motion small but certain. God's timing. Perfect. Always perfect. A gentle hand touched his shoulder. The nurse signaling the visit had to end. Father Elias nodded, then turned back to his sister. "I'll be right outside," he promised. "I won't leave the hospital. We have so much to talk about when you're stronger." As he prepared to leave, Sister Therese's lips moved again. "Tell me one thing," she whispered. "The church, is it still strong?" Father Elias smiled beneath his mask, his heart aching with love and awe. "The gates of hell have not prevailed against it," he answered, quoting Christ's words in the Gospel of Matthew. "Rest now, sister. God is with you, and so am I." As he stepped out of the room, Father Elias was struck anew by the depth of her faith. Her first question hadn't been about her suffering or her lost years. It was about the church, her lifelong vocation. Even after nearly 3 decades of isolation and abuse, her heart had not wavered. That Elias thought was no ordinary faith. It was the kind that transcended pain, outlasted cruelty, and pointed heavenward through even the deepest darkness. It was the kind of faith that could not be broken, and now at last it would help bring her back into the light. Thank you for choosing my video among thousands of videos out there to watch. Helping me with a subscription of yours is very small but very big and too valuable.